It's all good news, isn't it? Isn't it? Well, actually, it's not. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it really isn't. And the more we look at the big picture, the more it's clear that actually we've only just begun. That if you're seriously talking about reconstituting an entire civilization which is basically on its knees, then this is the work of generations, and it's going to take an awful lot of work by an awful lot of people. The good news is it can be done, and it has been done before. What is required in the big picture is nothing less than a renaissance. And there have been several of those in history, and there's no reason why there shouldn't be one now. The founders knew that a national culture was vital to having politics. And there's a great deal of talk about politics, and that's necessary, and that is what we are here for. But this word national means more than just politics. It means people, culture. It means imagination and arts, and all of those unfashionable things which have been neglected and underprized by both left and right. And it's embarrassing to say it, but it's true. The right bears a big part of the blame, actually, for the catastrophic state of culture and arts in the US and in the West more generally. People said it couldn't be done. In fact, in the late 19th century, some of the most talented Americans went to Europe because they really believed it would never happen. And they were, of course, proved wrong. It did happen. In the 20th century, the United States developed what was supposed in the old world to be impossible, which was a genuinely democratic and innovative, uncompromising artistic culture. And in fact, Americans invented an art form all to themselves, which is jazz and the popular music which has grown out of it. Do people care about this now? No. This is being left to die on the vine and in the gutter. And Americans also remade a new art form, which though the French had invented it, really the Americans took it over, which was cinema. And again, what is the state of Hollywood now? It's an embarrassment, right? And even the most refined kinds of European art forms, things like the novels and poetry, it actually turned out that these could be made the material of a genuinely, as I said, democratic mass culture. By the 1950s, if you wanted innovation in literature, you were looking at Americans, not at the British and not at the French. And what has happened since? The last time an American novel really matched, the greats of the past or even its own time, was Tom Wolfe, Bonfire of the Vanities. The last really significant literary event in American letters was the stabbing of Salman Rushdie. And that, by the way, is an act of terrorism, which is an act of performance, for the screen and so on. In other words, we are very good at memes, very bad at producing things which explain to people where we are, where we live, and how we would like to go with it. And nobody has yet managed to have a civilization without an art, without any arts. And we all saw the thing last week, 50% Americans don't open a book. It may be possible to have a democratic mass culture where people can't read or write, but I wouldn't bet on it. So the scale of the challenge should not be underestimated. We need to be planning now for the generations. It's great that we have the chance and we have come far and we are now in the eye of the storm. But this is no small thing. Where to begin? The good news is this. You have the means and you have the same impulses that created the American culture of the 1800s out of the fragments of the colonial world. This is still entirely possible. But this is an economic challenge as much as anything else. And the internet, as we know, has broke down the advertising-based model of media, which existed in the 20th century, and was in some parts a mirage. The combination of an advertising-based structure plus the Cold War produced a very narrow bandwidth of agreement and a very high degree of consensus because no one wanted to offend the advertisers or be called a communist. And this was a very effective way of producing cohesion. So that was quite an unnatural moment even in the history of the US. What we have now is, of course, the complete opposite, which is total fragmentation, total balkanization, multiple languages even, and overall, the demand that you subscribe to one culture or another. And this is reinforced, of course, by the media, whose business model works on polarity. You're not going to be able to reconstruct a culture. You're not going to be able to reconstruct a center without creating it from the bottom up. And as we know, this begins in the schoolroom. This begins before you get to university, before, by then it's too late. It begins with a national curriculum which actually places the full development of the individual, not turning people into little worker bees, but actually encouraging them to have an imagination, which is the full exercise of being a free and autonomous person. And this has been grossly neglected, not just in the United States, but pretty much everywhere else. And none of this is new. We know the failure of education is at the core of these things. Alan Bloom noticed it decades ago, and nothing has changed then, even down to the presence of the Rolling Stones as some kind of, mark of artistic excellence in the culture, right? This incoherent situation is absolutely been exacerbated, not just by policies of deliberate Philistinism on the part of governments, and you could say this about any Western government, including the British one, who've excelled at being Philistine, actually. It's been accelerated by the effects of mass immigration, which has effectively, made people, as even Keir Starmer, our impeccably liberal Prime Minister, said, made them strangers to each other. So how can you have a national culture? No wonder people say we're in a post-liberal age. And to that, I would just say one thing. Which kind of liberalism do you wish to be post of? Because if you wish to be after the progressive culture that dominated the 20th century and remade the American state in its image, well, that's a good thing, because we're certainly after it because it's collapsed. On the other hand, the 18th century liberalism on which this country is founded remains the only foundation. There is no medieval America to look back to. When people say return with a V, in Europe you can pretend you're going back to the Middle Ages, but in the United States you're not. There is nothing beyond that. And I, for one, believe it has more than enough legs in it still to be the foundation of a revived American culture. And Americans didn't used to fear that. In fact, they embraced change and risk. And yet we have somehow come to be ruled by people who, as Wayne's World said, we fear change. And this, as I can say, it's unacceptable. You shouldn't stand for it. You shouldn't have it. You must not accept this. You must return imagination and risk to the center of public life. And that actually means entrusting people with the ability to use their own imaginations. It means producing people who are literate enough to say offensive things and unspeakable things and reject the wisdom of the hour. Because it is only by that we're going to dig ourselves out of this kind of sclerotic, paralyzed mess that we are in. Now, there's no doubt that whether we do this or not, we are moving forward into a different era. It's not just a matter of technology, it's also that there is a deep rhythm in American history, which is about every 80 years or so, there is a epochal shift. From the Revolution to the Civil War to the big state of the 30s and 40s, and now to the struggle, and that explains a lot of the bitterness of the current struggle, that 80-year pivot is now come to us. If we don't build the institutions, we will lose the moment. And the other side will do their best to rebuild the failed, collapsing order, which everyone knows can't work, or they'll try to spin it forward into something which is deeply unpleasant and inimical, as Christopher Caldwell and many others have pointed out, has developed to a point when it is inimical to the civilization that the founders had in mind. So the stakes could not be higher, because the survival of America is the survival of all of Western civilizations, because all the other smaller nations are nothing more than satellites of American culture. And so when American culture looks like it has burnt out and withered and died and been neglected or whatever, everybody sees, okay, then we are in trouble, because the engine is no longer turning. And I believe the engine can be got going again, and we know how to do this. Everybody you meet here has the ideas to do it. But it is going to take time, and we shouldn't be any under illusion about where we are in this cycle. I referred to a Renaissance, and obviously when you say the Renaissance, you think of people in Florence wearing the tights and the multicolored shoes that turn up at the end and all of that. But before there was the Medici and before there was Florence, there was a long, hard run-up out of what used to be called the Dark Ages because it was miserable. And the monasteries functioned in a way analogous, I think, to the way that conservative media has functioned in this long period of struggle. The monasteries gathered together the reliable information of the day and built an image of the world that they wished to live in, that they wished to create. And it was only then, once you had a block of knowledge, that you can then take it down to the city, to Florence. And then you get into the business model, the question of how do you run a workshop? Can you do it without a patron? And the sorry truth of it is that we're going to need patrons. We can make all kinds of macro-level changes. We can make a political culture that is more encouraging of individual ambition, that makes it easier for people to start businesses. And we can begin the long process of fertilizing the ground and planting the seeds that will take a couple of generations to produce new cohorts of American creators. But in the meantime, and perhaps even then, we are going to need patrons. We're going to need people who can put money behind this, who believe in it. And we need to start thinking about how to build institutions that are so solid and sustainable that a mere change of government, a rotation of powers, will not be sufficient to undermine them. That in fact, as we noticed during the period of progressive dominance, when the other side came in, they actually found they kind of improved it a bit before they were shown the door again. That is the challenge before us. And I am optimistic about it because I believe Americans are the same people, actually. And I'm also optimistic about it because although the internet gave the sort of final kicking to a culture that was already on its knees, the internet is a fantastic tool for organization. And we have to build a culture of excellence in order to disseminate those values through the society. We have to use all those means and build what was called a Mandarin culture in the old world. And because that is a foundational thing here. We cannot rebuild a democratic culture until we've built the core institutions and the people who are totally committed to it. And the public are still out there. The public are bored. The public are so bored. They've been fed the same rubbish for decades. And they've become so bored, they've actually started doing it for themselves. The meme makers, the small publishers, the people who start bands on Bandcamp and end up touring in a small van for years, which, believe me, is not all the fun it's cracked up to be. But it is better than being bored. And being bored is currently where most people are. So this is happening out of a natural human instinct not to be bored stupid. The more we create the institutions that will foster imaginations, risk, excitement, the better and more fun it will be. There are plenty of things we can simply leave in the dust. The university system, as we knew it, for instance, we really should just ignore it and keep going. Yes, we need engineers and physicists. The last thing we need is PhDs in English literature, right? They've killed the novel. They've done their bit. Give it back to the people. The results cannot possibly be worse than what we have all endured, right? And these little platoons of people who are doing stuff because they don't want to be bored and they just will not take it any longer are bringing together big battalions of readers. And those, in time, will turn into the armies. They will turn into a universal national culture again. And you will find that the cultural goals of Americans will be in alignment with the cultural goals of the people and the state and the nation. This is how it is meant to work, and sometimes things just go badly off track. If we do that, it will happen. I truly believe it. But it's going to take time and it's going to take money. Generally other people's money, which is always the best way to do it. But the good news is this. We actually have won the culture war by default, in the deepest sense of the war for the culture, because the left has no interest in the human past. It has no interest in the great legacies of civilizations. It only is interested in things after about 1980, and only then because it takes them as a stick to make us feel bad about something with. The truly rewarding aspects of engaging with what it is to be a human have been left on the field for us to scoop up. And in fact, the field is so great and the opportunities for loot are so fantastic that we really are confused suddenly to be out in the open like this. Where do we begin with it? Well, the answer, as I was saying, is build the next step of Mandarin institutions, the future Harvards and Yales that will make the new Americans of the mass democratic culture of the 21st century. And it is a propitious time, and it is, like in Florence, one of those times which happens very, very rarely. Not much happened in Florence before. Even the Medici weren't much after that. Tourism was all that was left. But these moments arise and you have to take them. And this is the moment in that where the baton is going to be passed from the fanatics and the zealots, from the monks in the monasteries. It's going to be passed to the workshops and the patrons. And we have to scale it, we have to do it quickly, and we have to take it actually seriously as a business. And if we build that, they will come. Thank you.